I want you to open your Bibles, please, to this book of Psalms, Psalms number 137. Psalms number 137. I want to give a little, excuse me, I want to give a little background to this psalm. It's a story. It's a very sad story, by the way. It's a story of the people who are in captivity in the country of Babylon. We read about the captivity in Babylon, and we frankly don't pay very much attention to it. Not very much is said in the Bible about it. And so I'm going to read just a short portion of the 25th chapter of 2 Kings so that we'll get an idea of the tragedy of the Babylonian captivity. In this chapter, there's the story of how Nebuchadnezzar came and captured the city of Babylon, the city of Jerusalem, and completely destroyed it. The background of all of this is this. Nebuchadnezzar had overcome the forces of the Assyrian Empire, a terribly, terribly destructive empire, very ruthless people. They had a history of just being some of the most ruthless captors in the history of the world. Nebuchadnezzar was a little better, but still he was very much that way also. Nebuchadnezzar, though, had he had some building ideas in mind. And so he built up the city of Babylon to make it one of the most beautiful cities in the entire world. But he wanted access to countries all around him. Think of the country of Iraq. That's the old Babylonian Empire, a portion of the old Babylonian Empire. And the country of Iraq, you know, has the Tigris and Euphrates rivers coming through it. It's called Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers. But he had no real access to the sea. And so he was constantly trying to capture the nations that were over close to the Mediterranean Sea, so that he would have access to the commerce that would develop. And so this is pretty much the story of his beginning. The Israelites, particularly this was Judah at this time, the people of Judah, they were very rebellious. They had been worshiping idols and all this sort of thing, and still they called on the name of God. God to them by that time was just kind of one more God in the big pantheon of all kinds of gods. And but they did continue to worship Him, and they continued to offer sacrifices. And as I read to you from Isaiah this morning, their lives were so corrupt that God says, your sacrifices mean nothing whatever to me. Well, the armies of Nebuchadnezzar invaded Judah 3 times. This was around 580 BC. They invaded Jerusalem about 3 times, and finally Nebuchadnezzar had so much trouble with these people that he destroyed their city. Now it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and his army came against Jerusalem, and they encamped against it, and they built a siege wall all around the city. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. In the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine had become so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. The city wall was broken through, and all of the men of war fled at night by the gate between the 2 walls, which was by the king's garden. even though the Chaldeans were still encamped all around against the city. And the king went the way of the plain. The Chaldeans, he goes on and tells us, went out and they recaptured Zedekiah the king, and they punched his eyes out, and then they killed his children in front of him. And then the army of the Chaldeans, with their captain of the guard, broke down the walls of Jerusalem all around. Nebuzaradan, by the way, was he was the captain of the guard of Nebuchadnezzar. Sometimes people get these two guys mixed up just a little bit. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away the captives from the rest of the people who remained in the city, and the defectors and who had deserted the king of Babylon with the rest of the multitude. But the captain of the guard left some of the poor in the land as vine dressers and farmers. The bronze pillars which were in the house of the Lord, and the carts and the bronze sea that were in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans broke in pieces, and they carried the bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots and the shovels and the trimmers and the spoons and the bronze utensils. He goes on and describes it, said the fire pans and the basins, the things of solid gold and solid silver. The captain of the guard took them away. And he goes on and describes the rest of the destruction of this great city of Jerusalem. And now the people who had inhabited that beautiful, wonderful city of Jerusalem, they're carried captive into the city of Babylon, into the country, which was a very strange country to them. Their captivity was very, very difficult, very hard. Now, it was not hard for all of them. Some of them, Daniel, for example, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had things pretty well. Nehemiah was another one who had things pretty well. They worked in the actual court of the king, and they gained a great deal of notoriety because of the position that they had. Also, Daniel had the respect of the king. And so it was a very divided kind of a situation. Most of the people, however, found that the Babylonian captivity was 70 years of pure misery. The writer of the 137th Psalm was among those captives. We can view this in two different ways. Maybe he was just a little boy when the captivity came. Maybe, on the other hand, he was actually born there in Babylon. And yet he had been taught about the grandeur and the beauty of Jerusalem and all, and now he goes back when the captivity is over and he sees the ruins of his own, of the city of his own parents, and he writes this psalm. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that this man was maybe a 40-year-old man who was taken captive. As we read about this captivity, we find out that only a select group of people were taken captive. And that select group was the artisans, the craftsmen, the educated, the people who could really contribute to the culture of Babylon. And the poor, pardon the expression, but this is the idea, the poor and the people who are called the riffraff. They were the people who were left there in the old ruined city of Jerusalem. And so there's all kinds of mixed emotions that are going on here. Perhaps this 40-year-old man, and I'm just pulling that age out of the air. We don't know how old he was. But let's just suppose that perhaps this 40-year-old man taken captive over there, he's being abused, he's being neglected, he's being tortured, he's being taunted, and he sits down and writes this lovely poem. The poem really divides itself into about 4 sections. In the first section, he introduces the whole thing. I'll read the entire psalm and then we'll go back and talk about its components. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hung our harps upon the willows in the midst of it. For there were those who carried us away captive, who asked us a song. And those who plundered us requested mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How should we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its very foundation. O daughter of Babylon, you are to be destroyed. Happy is the one who repays you as you have served us. Happy is the one who takes and dashes your little ones against the rock. Let's pause for a moment and think in terms of the Psalms themselves. You see, the Bible is God's Word, God speaking to us. The Psalms form a part of that, but the Psalms are quite different because the Psalms really are man speaking to God. Man speaking to God. And when we read the Psalms with that idea in mind, that reality in mind, the Psalms mean so much more to us. And these men who wrote these Psalms, they were men who confronted God, argued with God. They didn't like some of the things that God did. They didn't like some of the things that God did not do. And so throughout the entire book of Psalms, we have these encounters with God. And then we have also the laments of these people. How it was that when they were in sorrow, how they would express this sorrow to God. In one of the Psalms, the 52nd Psalm, there is the story of a man who had committed some grievous, terrible sin. Many people think this was possibly David, but he had committed this terrible, grievous sin, and he was pleading for forgiveness. And he expresses how deep is his sense of guilt. And so the Psalms are parts of the Bible where we see people pouring out their hearts to the Lord. This is, in so many cases, this is genuine, honest prayer. And then there are Psalms of joy. There are Psalms that describe the procession of people going to worship. There are Psalms that describe the joy of the singing of praises to God. And then there are Psalms which tell us of some of their remorse and some of the sad things. So here is a man who is a captive. He says, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat down, yes, we wept when we remembered Zion. Stop and think for a moment. The Temple of Solomon. There was so much gold in Solomon's temple that the Bible says they didn't consider silver at all because the worth of silver, because there was so much gold. He literally imported tons of gold in building that temple. The Bible tells us something about the weight of this gold. This gold was displayed. There were utensils made of this gold. A great deal of artisanship went into the building of the temple. It was a massive structure. It had an outer court there that where certain people could go and others could not. The Gentiles couldn't go. But the whole thing was just such a beautiful, grand, wonderful temple. The palace that Solomon had built for himself was still there. They worked on that palace for 13 years, and it was a beautiful, beautiful place. The Bible gives us a description of the temple. It doesn't give us a description of the palace. But they worked on the palace longer than they worked on the temple. So you can see that it certainly had some great, great, wonderful things. And then the people. The people were proud. They were proud of the beauty of the city. And it was supposed to be one of the most beautiful cities that one could ever imagine. And now the writer of the Psalms looked back on this city and he remembers its beauty. He remembers its grandeur. And now it's in ruins. And the gold has been taken out of the ruins and carried to Babylon. The silver has been taken from the ruins of the temple, carried to Babylon. And then the city was set on fire. So they burned down the other structures. And now the city is in ruins. The wall of the city is torn down. And that's what this man is remembering. It's an interesting thing because the people of Judah, who came to be known as the Jews, by the way, which is a short for Judean, these people of Judah, they had worshipped many gods. They were pagan. They had become pagans. They had been raised to believe in God, and their forefathers believed in one God. There was a monotheism about these people that had been lost. The prophets warned them, you're going to pay for this. And the prophets urged them to come back to the Lord, and they laughed at them. Literally, they laughed at the prophets. And then it happened. And now he looks back on it, and these people were sitting down by the rivers of Babylon. There's about 30 miles that separate the Tigris and Euphrates rivers at the city of Babylon. I was at Babylon one time, and it's just very interesting to see the ruins of that old city. It's hard to imagine it as the city of grandeur that it really was, because the ruins don't present that idea, of course. But you have to stop and think that, even the historians said, if you haven't seen Babylon, you haven't seen the world. They sat down by the rivers of Babylon. Between the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, there was a series of canals that connected them. And it was in that area that all of these willow trees were. It was in that area that he says they sat down and they wept when they remembered Zion. I remember in World War II, I was in France. I was in the Merchant Marine, and our ship came into France. And I went ashore, and almost every building in the city of Le Havre, almost every building had been either bombed out and destroyed, or it had been severely damaged. And I think of what I saw there from the bombing, and think of the destruction of Jerusalem. So he says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept when we thought about this beautiful city, when we remembered Zion. There's a symbolic idea here then expressed in verse 2. He says, we hung our harps on the willow trees. The harps that had been the source of music and joy are now the emblems of severe punishment, severe suffering. To hang your harp on the willow tree was to say, I am in the deepest possible mourning. So he says, that's what we did. Upon the willows in the midst of it, we hung our harps. Then he talks about how they were tantalized. Oh, you know, when you're in power, you can say all kinds of things against the people that you are ruling over, and that's what happened. Those who plundered us required mirth of us. Sing a song of Zion. Well, the Jewish people were known for their music. The Psalms are basically poems that are to be set to music. So many of them are that way. You know the word Selah? As you read the Psalm, you come to a word Selah. You're not supposed to read that, by the way. That's a musical note. That's a musical pause. And that's the idea. But usually when people read the Psalms, they read Selah. That's like a pianist playing a piece of music, and he stops and it says, pianissimo. And then he keeps on going. Pianissimo means play softly. Well, that's kind of the way it is, you know. But he says, you have these songs of joy. You have these songs of Zion. Sing one for us. And then there's a little introspection here. How shall I sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And his vow, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. There is somehow or another, there is this yearning to go back to the original. Or if we could just turn back the clock, if we could just change things by going backwards in time. How many things in my life would I change? How many things in your life would you change if you just go backward in time? He knows that that's impossible, but he says, I don't ever want to forget. I remember visiting Miami, Florida, where I was born a number of years ago, and my sister and my wife and I, we were all down there together, and we drove around the city. The city had changed so much. I was born in 1926, and now this was in about 1995 or a little later. And we went by the old church building where we had grown up and worshiped. And sadly, it had been destroyed. It was no longer there, just a vacant lot now. That does something to you. We went to the old house where we had lived, and it was so different. It was still there, but it was so different. It had been neglected. And you know, when we looked at those things, we had such wonderful memories, but we had such sad memories. Wonderful memories of growing up, sad memories of seeing the reality of destruction and neglect. And so this man says, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget my skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. his symbolic way of expressing, let the vital part of my life be taken away from me. And then he stops and thinks for a moment about what took place at the time of the destruction. As we read the full accounts of the time of destruction, the Edomites, by the way, were cousins of the Jewish people. The Edomites saw the Babylonians coming in and destroying that city, and I guess we could put it in kind of a colloquial way that yeah, you know, tear it down, raise it, destroy it. And the psalmist says, remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day that Jerusalem, and the day of Jerusalem. Those who said, raise it to its very foundation. And then he has vengeance in his mind. One of the things about the Psalms is that the writers are so much of the time very, very honest. He didn't try to cover up his desire for vengeance against these people. O daughter of Babylon, who are to be destroyed, happy is the one who repays you as you have served us. Happy is the one who takes and dashes your little ones against a rock. That's been confusing to some people. They have had the idea that this is God saying, destroy the babies, smash them against the rock. No. Remember what I said in the beginning? The Psalms are people expressing themselves to God. And that's exactly what is going on here. These people are saying to God, God, punish them just the way they punished us. We have been hurt. We want to fight back. And so he pronounces a blessing. Happy is the one who takes and dashes the little ones against the rock. Now, what's the overall message that he has here? I think it's a very practical message. Even though they were in apostasy, even though these people were worshiping pagan gods, there was that little memory of the true God that stayed with them. Why? We don't know. How is that possible? We don't know. But when it's all taken away from them, they kind of come to their senses and they say, why did we live the way we lived? It's too late now. Why didn't we listen to the prophets? But it's too late now. Why didn't we listen to the message of God? It's too late now. It's too late. And so, I think the message of the Psalm to us is, let's not allow this to happen in our own lives. Let's not later on in life look back and say, I wish I had been faithful. I wish I had been active. I wish that I had let my light shine before men as Jesus spoke. These people had the deepest possible regrets. These regrets were not necessary. These regrets were their own fault. So I appeal to you tonight, be faithful to the Lord, that regrets might not come in your life, that regrets might not come in my life. Be faithful to the Lord in spite of the odds, in spite of the opposition, in spite of the price that has to be paid. The message of this song is, don't be a person who will look back and say, I wish I could change it. We're going to sing an invitation song now. If you are in any way subject to the invitation of Christ, we invite you to come forward. Let's stand together and sing.